There are a lot of archers out there who are kind of struggling along on their own, but you don't have to. So today, I've got a bunch of archers from the Rogue Archery Masterclass who have submitted videos in for analysis. So my name's Jarryd Gracious. I am the head coach of Rogue Archery, which is a leading archery academy here in Australia. And I'm a Recurve archery technique coaching expert. So I help people understand and diagnose archery technique issues, and then we help them improve their technique, mindset, and physiology for archery performance, and ultimately help them shoot high scores. So if you exist in this domain, you're in the right place. You can subscribe to the channel below. But today I have a special treat for you. So like I said, I've got 12 archers who have submitted form videos in for analysis. And we've got archers today who are at a variety of skill levels. So I think you'll find it very, very instructive to see how we break down form for archers at different stages of development. So let's dive straight into it. And our first archer here is Adam. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to play you through the form videos that these archers have sent in. And as we go through it, I'm going to really try and break down exactly what I'm looking for, along with my training recommendations. But if you are an archery coach, then you'll know that no two archery coaches will identify the exact same thing. So what I'd like to invite you to do today is, as you're going through these videos, please jump in the comments. Let us know what you see as well. Do you have any recommendations for these archers? So we'll play through these videos a few times. We'll have a good hard look. I'll give you a chance to also come up with your own ideas. And I've also got some notes against each of these archers as we go through. Now, Adam is from Trinidad and Tobago, and he's one of the top recurve archers over there. And he's been actually really, really active in our Rogue Archery Masterclass group. So thank you, Adam. Really love to see your progress. It's actually mind-blowing to see the progress he's made from when he first joined us, because he's been putting in some hard work. I think Adam's also got some competitions coming up, some regional comps, if I'm not mistaken. And so what we'll be looking at is, I guess, keeping in mind, I do know Adam quite well in terms of where he's come from and where he's at the moment. So we'll be trying to identify what is the next step in his development. But what do you think? So there are a couple of things that I want to highlight to you about Adam, because I do know him quite well. The first thing is that Adam is not alone in this, but he is tending to be, he's very good at analyzing and self-reflecting, okay? He has good self-awareness about his shot process, and he always tends to ask really, really thoughtful and good questions in the group. But he's also prone a little bit to overthinking, okay? So let me know if you are one of these archers, okay? Now, what I'll share with you is archers that are good at analysis and good at, tend to be more prone to overthinking. And it tends to really help you when you're a beginner, okay? Because you really kind of like deep diving and learning about the techniques, learning new skills, trying to understand them. And that obviously is a good thing when you're a beginner. But as you move up to higher levels, okay, what can happen is you can be prone to overanalyze. So this means that in a competition time is not the time to analyze, it's the time to do, okay? Analyzing is for practice. In fact, it's right at the early stages of development in skill acquisition when you're learning new skills and you're trying to refine those skills. But yeah, we'll just jump off his videos for a second because this is an important point. It's important to recognize that, yeah, as you move closer to the performance or the larger milestones in your pathway, then yeah, you want to stop analyzing and kind of build up confidence in your shot execution. If you start to guess yourself and analyze things in that gold medal final 1 hour shoot off, that's not the way, okay? You just need to follow your process, trust your training, and execute. So that's one thing we're going to keep an eye out for with Adam, okay? The other thing is he is prone to over-exaggerate some elements in his technique, and already I can start to see some things here. And again, this is sometimes encouraged by a pursuit of chasing that feeling. You know what I'm talking about? So when I say chase that feeling, a lot of archers try and learn a technique based on the feeling of it, the feeling of it within your body. They try and feel back tension. They try and feel a certain position, and they want to feel the squeeze. Okay, and this also is full of holes, and so that's why I tell all my students that I don't care about your feelings, but you know exactly what I mean. Okay, I've got a whole video on that. But let me know, what do you think with Adam so far? I've got a couple of observations. We're going to start from the ground up, because where's the angle that I want? This is the one. All right. When it comes to archery technique, all of the stability and of the shot comes from the stance, and it kind of comes up through the legs, hips, core, torso, and through the shoulders. And ultimately, you only touch the bow with two parts of your body, right? Your hands. So all of that stability translates up through your body, and they has to be connected. All right. If there's a weak link in the chain, then you lose stability and you lose efficiency in the shot. And Adam here is shooting with an open stance. Now, the first thing I notice is that his stance is quite close together. In fact, I think he should widen his stance a little bit, as in make his feet slightly wider apart. Okay, that's my first observation, Adam. So go ahead and probably another 2 inches wider, and that will help you brace a little bit better and be a bit more stable. And Adam also shoots with an open stance. Now, you guys know what an open stance is, right? It's where you open so this arrow here is obviously the shooting line, and you can see that it's not a perfectly square line here, but you can see that whilst that's the shooting line, his stance is at an angle to the shooting line. He is open to the target. Now, absolutely nothing wrong with an open stance. However, there are a bunch of considerations that you need to understand about this position. First things first is that when you're shooting with any stance, square or open, the stance sets the angle of the hips. Okay, so as you go through the shot process, your hips should always be above your stance. Okay, we don't want any twisting through the legs or anything like that, because that leads to instability in the lower body, which, as I said, can unravel the shot later on. Now, what we can see here in Adam is that his stance is open. All right, I'll redraw this line. His stance is open on sort of this angle. But interestingly, what should happen in an open stance is that your hips should be open to the target in line with your stance. But it almost looks to me like his hips are even more open to the target, okay? Just by a small amount. So he's almost rotating his hips towards the target more than he's opened his stance to the target, okay? So we'll try and look at this from another angle as well. Okay, let's have a look here. So to my eye, and I do have some experience with this, it's like he's rotating his hips in this direction. Now, the reason why I can pick up on this is because this is actually quite common, okay? Do you have any ideas on why an archer might be inclined to do this? All right, there are a couple of reasons. And have you ever heard the statement before that an open stance increases back tension? It's complete nonsense, but we need to break this down in a little bit of details. You know what back tension is, right? It's tension in essentially the scapular retractors, the muscles that continue to retract the scapula on the drawing side here. And yes, we absolutely do want to maintain back tension. But like I said before, this is often misinterpreted into what you want to do is you want to feel the back muscles squeezing during your shot, which is actually not true. Okay, this is a very common misconception. And I can tell you now that the feeling in your body when you do a good shot for an experienced archer is effortlessness. Okay, let me know in the comments below if you've ever had one of those perfect shots which just sings to you. You know, it almost feels like butter coming through the clicker. It's so easy. It's almost like the bow just shot itself, okay? And when you get that feeling of almost effortlessness and your bow just sings and it sounds nice and you see it plump in the middle of the 10, that's that kind of addictive feeling that keeps us coming back for more, right? So effortlessness and efficiency is really what we're striving for in terms of an efficient shot process, not muscular strain, okay? But the term back tension is often misinterpreted to meaning that we are trying to squeeze the back muscles harder and harder and harder and just create this contraction. So bear with me a second and do an example with me. So if you extend your arm like this, okay, and just bend it through this range of motion for me, okay? And what I'd like you to do is, to do this action, you understand what muscle we're working. We're using the bicep. That's the motion that the bicep does. It bends the elbow. And so if you move it through that range of motion, can you actually feel the muscle working? You can't, because there's no resistance, right? So if I told you to pick up a 20 kilo dumbbell, you probably could feel the muscle squeezing, all right? Because that's quite heavy. But if I tell you to kind of take no resistance and contract all the way and then squeeze the muscle, okay, so you're squeezing the bicep, you can now feel that kind of muscular contraction, can't you? So in this manner, basically, when resistance is low, and again, our bows shouldn't be so heavy in draw weight that you're feeling muscular strain in your back when you're pulling the bow, okay? If that's the case, your bow's too heavy or you're not strong enough, and it's just going to get fatigued super quick, and you're going to be really inconsistent. Like I said, we're striving, you should feel almost effortless through that clicker range. But if you strive for the feeling of back tension, what are you going to do? All right? You're going to do like this. You're going to feel your bicep squeezing, you have to go to the end of the range of motion and then just squeeze the muscle. And this is actually what we're seeing with Adam here. His scapula is fully retracted, okay, all the way to the end of the range of motion. And then I suspect here, Adam, what you're doing is, because you've fully retracted the scapula, you're just sort of squeezing that muscle together, and that's what's creating that sensation of feeling back tension. However, you'll notice that instead of just squeezing the back this way, by rotating the hips in this direction, he's actually twisting the spine towards the scapula rather than bringing the scapula towards the spine. Do you see that? Whereas if you can imagine, the spine wasn't so twisted like this, then it wouldn't be so close to the edge of the spine. But because you're twisting your hips away, it brings the spine closer to the scapula. So this is how something in your stance and your hips can affect later in the shot, okay? And this is why, we have to examine the shot from the ground up. So I know we're going in a big circular reference here, but I'll bring it back. Again, just to highlight, let's look at another archer who does an open stance, and let's look at one of the best to do it, Brady. Interestingly, with Brady Ellison, he shoots with quite an open stance, I think you'll agree. But it's not as open as you might think. I'll just draw the angle on here, but you can see that if we measure the angle of Brady's stance, it's about 25 degrees, okay? And what we'll also do is we will measure the angle of his hips, and you can see that the angle of his hips is parallel with the angle of his stance, okay? And that's maintained throughout the shot. Okay, so let's go forward. I think I have another angle of Brady here. Where's the one? Okay, this is a good one, because you can see from the whole shot process. So again, here we have Brady. He has the angle of his stance, okay? And let's just measure the angle since we have the option. Interesting. Okay, pretty consistent. Would you guys agree? I'm just lining up his shoelaces here, but you could do it in the same manner based on his toes. Okay, very consistent. About 25 degrees is Brady's stance. All right. Then if we look at the angle of his hips, okay, open to the target on the same angle. And also, I'll just point out here, because this is such a great angle to analyze, is you notice in his starting position, in his set or setup position, his shoulders are also on the same angle. Okay, so this is the ideal setup position, and for shooting with an open stance. Okay, we'll get to a square stance maybe later at some of the other archers, but this is the ideal setup position. As we go through the shot, I think this camera angle moves annoyingly, but you can see that his hips and his stance stay in the same line, don't they? So, okay, angle of the stance, angle of the hips. But what's happened to the line of his shoulders? He's obviously gone ahead and he's lined his shoulders up with the target, creating that shoulder alignment position. Okay. So that is the important part here. Now let's go back to Adam. Whereas what Adam's done is actually, his stance is a little bit too narrow, but he's actually twisting his hips away from the target. And I recommend, Adam, what you do is you probably have made your stance a little bit too open. So bring it into that sort of 20-degree mark, okay? And what we need to do is we need to align your hips with your stance. Okay, you get the idea. That needs to be really, really emphasized. Now you'll also note that Adam is not twisting his hips through the draw. So that's really good, okay? I think we'll get to that with some of the other archers later, that it's really common that during this draw, people actually twist through the hips in order to achieve shoulder alignment. But Adam's doing a pretty good job of using thoracic rotation here, but just the starting position of his hips and stance needs some work. Okay. So that's that. The other thing that is obvious from this angle is if we go through his shot process, let's just look at his head position. But what you can notice is from this setup position, okay, he's presenting his head to the target, and in this position, what I teach is the head position should be now fixed. So we don't want the head position to move through the rest of the shot. If it's moving throughout the shot, you understand that everything then changes. So if your head's moving, then first of all, the head is a reference between, or the anchor is a reference between the head and the hand. So if your head position is even a little bit inconsistent, then it's going to lead to inconsistency in your anchor position. It's also going to change your perspective on the target, maybe your string picture and other things that are going to be just a little bit out. But when you're going for high scores, that can be the difference between, say, shooting a gripping the size of, you know, the 9 or a gripping the size of the 8. It's just all these tiny little things that can be lined up or not lined up. So as we go through Adam's shot process here, okay, head position is presented to the target, that's good. But as he draws, you see that? It was kind of, as he rotates his shoulders to achieve shoulder alignment during the pre-draw step, his head is rotating. Now he actually gets to a really nice head position, okay? So I'm really happy with this head position. But what I would say, Adam, is instead of moving the head to get there, this is where it should start. Often a lot of the time with head position or head movement, archers will end up sometimes because they'll move the head to get the right anchor position. And unless you're frangili, don't do that. So yeah, they'll come into anchor and they'll do all kinds of movement to get there. Well, if that's your head position, start in that position so that you don't actually have to move your head to get there. Okay? And then what you'll find is that you'll have a lot more consistency in your head position, you'll be a lot more stable, your weight distribution and balance will be better, your expansion will be more stable. It makes a huge amount of difference. So Adam, I would say head position is good, but start there. So that way you don't have to move there. And if I was there with you, what I would do to teach you this is actually hold your head in place, okay? So we would set it from the setup position from here, where you look at the target, find that sweet spot. Then I would hold your head firmly in place so that if you start to move or rotate, you get a bit of kinesthetic feedback. And in this manner, you can learn, okay, this is when I'm moving my head, and you can self-correct, okay? Because ultimately, a coach is not going to be there to hold your head while you're shooting in a tournament, right? So it's good to learn that way, but it doesn't. You have to learn how to do it by yourself, okay? So we've got hips, we've got stance, hips, and head position. And the other thing I just want to circle back to that I've got in my notes here is scapular positioning and how that's affecting things. So I suspect if you're watching along at home, one of the things you wrote down with Adam is release, right? Because when you look at his release, what you'll notice is there's a moment where it's really static. You see how the instant of release, let's try and find it here. It's not really a dynamic, powerful follow through like on the drawing side. He kind of reacts, and then he squeezes the elbow around. Now, you have to understand that the reaction of the release is, well, it's just that. I just gave you the answer. It's the reaction, right? It's not we're not just doing it for style points. There's no flamboyancy in the release. There's no one holding up cards telling you got a 10 out of 10 release. In archery, you just hit the target or not, so you get the points for what you shoot. The reason why the release reaction is so important is because it's indicating the forces in the body at the moment of that the shot breaks. So if your release is dead, what does that mean? It means you're kind of just bracing, you're too tense, you have no fluidity, you've probably lost direction, you're just all locked up and tense, and that's why there's no fluidity. Whereas really what we're trying to do is we're trying to maintain fluidity through our expansion, and you got force from the bow pushing into you and force from you pushing back, and then you got force on the string pulling this way, and you got the bow pulling back, and then at the moment of release, when we relax our fingers and it all goes pop, there's this kind of explosive movement as the body reacts to that change in force equilibrium. Okay, so it's a reaction. And the reaction indicates the forces in the body at that point in time. And if at that point in time it all kind of unravels, it shows that you weren't able to maintain structure, you weren't applying power evenly and all that sort of stuff. So back to Adam. I suspect you picked up on is that his release is very static. But the question I want to ask for you is kind of a forced release. It's not that beautiful, flowing, dynamic pop that we're looking for. Why not? What can he do to create that? Remember, it's a reaction. So there's something going on here during expansion which loses power. And I can tell you now this relates back to his stance and his hip position. Because what Adam has done here is he's rotating the hips in this kind of counterclockwise direction in order to squeeze the scapula into the spine to feel the back tension. His scapula is already at the end of its range of motion. You can see here it's got it fully retracted and his spine squeezing into the scapula. So he can't create power by continuing to flow through that range of motion. So it's just squeezing at the end, all right? And whilst he's exerting himself and he's applying a lot of energy, it doesn't create any power through the clicker range. All right, so I just want to demonstrate the position of the scapula through the shot process. Okay, this is the scapula here, shoulder blade. And you can see this is like, this is setup position, raise pre-draw. Then we have the scapula position as something like here. Loading anchor. Scapular positioning is something like here. Expansion release, and then the scapular positioning is something like here. Let's go through that again. All right, set up, pre-draw, loading anchor, 1, 2, pop. Okay, now in follow-through position, this is when the scapula is fully retracted. You catch that? Whereas during expansion, yeah, it's most of the way retracted, but it's like maybe 80-85% of the way there. It's not squeezing into the spine. There's still a little bit of room to go, okay, to close that gap. And that's where the power is created through the clicker range. Whereas you can imagine if I twist my hips so that my spine is now squeezing into the scapula, then of course there's no more room to go. And even though you're exerting a lot of energy, no power is created. So there you go. Scapular positioning matters way more than back tension, guys. You heard it here first. So I think, Adam, there's a couple of actions there for you. Starting from the ground up, we're going to, where are we? Starting from the ground up, widen the stance, and we're going to probably square it up just a little bit so it's just more like the 20 degrees open to the target. Then we're going to make sure that the stance and the hips are in the same line or parallel. Then we're going to look at the starting head position, which I think will obviously be affected by this change in posture and hips. Then on top of all that, what we're going to do is this is going to give you room to expand throughout the expansion phase, which is going to improve power. And I think that is going to create and allow you to create that dynamic pop in the release. And I think it's also going to improve your timing. So experienced archers in the chat, I am sure you picked up on Adam's timing here. Okay, it's something we've talked about before, but let's just go through a shot here. Into anchor. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh man. Okay. So what should the optimal timing be? What do you think? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 seconds. All right, guys. So timing's really interesting in the shot. I've done actually a bit of a study on this where I took some archers and I stood behind them on a tournament line, and through my scope, I plotted every single arrow in terms of the score, and I also timed the archer on a stopwatch how long their expansion time was, okay? And what we did was we did some statistical analysis on those numbers and worked out for that archer, okay, what's the relationship between your expansion timing, the timing between anchor and release, and the arrow value, okay? Simple enough. And what we found was really interesting. So for the archer I was looking at, we found that if he held for longer than 5 seconds, he had a 0% chance of shooting a 10. Okay, like basically straight up there, the longer he held, the worse he shot. All right. Then we did some analysis where we looked at the arrow average per hold time. We looked at the number of mistakes. So when he shot a 7 or lower, we considered that a mistake because it was outside of his normal grouping size. And so we looked at the ratio of mistakes based on the hold time. We looked at also the standard deviation of timing within a 6 arrow end and how that related to the overall score out of 60. And so we found that the more the timing varied per end, then if it varied by more than half a second per end, then there was like 1 point or drop in score across 6 arrows. So if your timing shot to shot is varying by 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, you can imagine that's a significant drop in performance. We found for this particular archer, the sweet spot was between 2 and 3 seconds, where from anchor, 1, 2, pop, was perfect. And when he shot in that sweet spot, in that zone, then what we found is that he shot the most proportion of the highest amount of 10s, the highest score out of 60 for 6 arrows, and the least amount of mistakes. Okay, he actually shot no mistakes when he shot within that timing window. Now that was really interesting because obviously from the textbooks and the coaching theory, about 3 seconds is kind of the theory, right? But to see it validated in that manner was really, really powerful stuff. And whilst I'd been kind of hounding this archer about timing for so long, when I was able to sit down and show him the data, it really sunk in for him. Oh, this is costing me points. This is really affecting my performance. So when we look at Adam here, he's holding for a very long time. I think that, yeah, the timing is a priority. I think if you can improve your timing, your score will absolutely improve. And it's the kind of thing that, we've got a couple of minor technique changes to make. I don't think these things are going to take you 6 months to work on, for example. You've laid down a strong foundation of your shot process. Stance and hip adjustment, okay, head position and starting position, that might take you a little bit to work out, but you should be able to nail that in a couple of hours of practice. And then allowing you to create more power through the expansion range with the scapula, then you should focus on drilling timing, okay, and be really, really strict with it. Then you're going to see a huge improvement in your points. Okay, but thank you very much, Adam, for submitting your videos. So let's hear it for Adam from Trinidad and Tobago. So let's pull up our next archer. And our next archer is Callum, okay? Callum from the UK. And I've also got some notes from Callum. So he sent in some feedback when he sent these videos. He said that lately I've been struggling with high left and low right inconsistency, and I'm hoping you could let me know the elements of my technique that might explain this. Okay. So he says, like you, I have a high degree of flexibility for internal rotation in the front arm. Unfortunately, it's hard to see with all the layers on in this video. It was really cold. But during expansion, I struggle with losing the rotation slightly. I don't think this is necessarily strength since it doesn't happen with SPT holds. Okay, that's interesting. Only when actively expanding through the clicker. I can maintain the rotation easily at full draw hold, but I feel like I'm fighting it whilst trying to expand. Okay, fighting it is not the intention there. So we'll have a look at that. If I try to expand through without allowing any change of the internal rotation, I get pain in the supraspinatus. Heal the bow and get poor string clearance, and I'm not entirely sure what to aim for here. Okay, yeah, that's a bit of a problem, so we'll have to look at that. And do you have any advice for how to approach this problem? Yes, I do. Other than that, there's a long list of technical issues that I'm aware of. Head movement, losing T posture during release, soft and outwards release, especially in competition, tilting, canting the bow to the left, and this is obviously too long of a list to think about during a shot, which leads to my question about my mindset. Do you have any advice on the mental game and dealing with competition pressure? I tend to become hyper aware that my shots don't feel the same as in practice, hold for a really long time, and then inevitably score badly. Thanks again for taking the time to do this form review. Callum, you're very, very welcome, mate. And I think we can help you with this. So there's actually quite a long list of things that he's brought up there, and we've got quite a bit to get through. The first thing I think is, let me know in the comments, guys, if you have experienced any of these same issues as Callum, particularly relating to getting to a competition and your form feels different, okay? And then you lose confidence in your shot and you try and fix things as you go, and it doesn't work out. We mentioned it with Adam before, right? In a bit of the preamble, I talked about how, training is a time for analyzing and competition is a time for doing. And we also talked about how don't chase the feeling, okay? Your feelings can change. You can feel different day to day, but you have to shoot the same. So yeah, let me know what you think, guys. Have you experienced some of the same issues as Callum? Do you notice that when you get to a competition, your form deteriorates, you lose confidence? And it kind of makes sense from what I'm seeing here, because he's also sent me in a score sheet where he's shooting an indoor round, obviously here. His score's about the 270 mark. But looking at your form, Callum, here's the thing, right? I actually think that looking at your basic form, it looks very good. Your shot process is excellent. And I would have guessed that with your technical ability here, you'd be shooting more kind of the mid 280s at indoor. And that's your ability. But whereas maybe the mindset due to your competition is letting you down. So let's talk a little bit about that. The first thing that I want to point out, and we've got to try and break this down in a bit of a logical sequence, is you'll notice that Callum shoots with a square stance here, hips are square to the target. And when we look at this, we did talk about this with Adam before, is I just want to check to make sure that he has no hip rotation during the draw. Beautiful work. Look at that. Totally stable hips and quiver. Fantastic work. Okay, alignment's pretty solid. Nice dynamic reaction of the release there. You can see that he has a bit that nice kind of pop and elbow movement back, continuing to retract the scapula. Okay, on this side we should be able to see it as well. Let's just come to here. Good. Now I know he's wearing a long t-shirt, but I think we can see here. Let's just look at his scapular positioning, guys, because I think this is something that he's doing well, okay? Scapula is there, raise, pre-draw, okay, about there, letting anchor, about there, and then he's squeezing it in, okay. So that's pretty good. So scapular side, nice, and then we can see that nice dynamic pop in the release. We can see here, and you did bring it up, that as you're expanding, look at the front arm here, guys. So if we just put a little mark there on his shoulder, then as he's expanding, can you see that movement before the release? We'll just zoom right in on that sucker. Okay, so we're putting him under the microscope here, guys, so let's be kind. Okay, you can see that before the release is even happening, he's losing the arm rotation. This is what he's talking about. It's rotating outwards, and the shoulder's coming up, and there's a little bit of collapse on the front shoulder position there. That's really important, because whilst the release hand controls the string, the stability and the direction of the shot on the bow side is controlled by this front shoulder. So if that's being lost, then of course it's going to affect your gripping, because as you're expanding, the stability of the bow is changing and it's moving in space. So that's definitely a priority. But I want to start with his head position and the loss of T posture through the shot. He did bring this up in his notes. So let's have a look at this. Okay, I'm just going to go to some key positions here. All right, so starting position. Let's draw on his T posture. Okay. Draw some nice circles here. Okay, a little bit of head movement. Not the worst we've seen. Probably in the shot, your head's a little bit too far forward, and then through the raise, kind of comes back to the right position. And then when you come into anchor, he's searching for the string a little bit, as in bringing the nose to the string rather than bringing the string to the nose. Okay, and then expanding. Okay, so here's what we can see, is that on the follow through, you can see a loss of T posture, right? So let's just look. When it comes into anchor, it's actually pretty solid. So T posture refers to essentially this line here. I'll try and make that a bit better. All right, where we want that nice square T here. Whereas when he releases, do you see what happens? His T moves a little bit more like this. Okay, I should have drawn them different colors, shouldn't I? But you can see that as he's expanding, what this indicates is that he's expanding a bit this way. You understand? So that he's expanding by applying this sort of force to get through the clicker, and then when he releases, it reacts. Okay? So this is very common, but I think this definitely something to work on. Whereas I did a video, it's on YouTube recently, called WTF is Expansion, where I talk about the correct action for expansion. And obviously in the masterclass, Callum, go just review the expansion module, because I have some drills in there that might help with this. But essentially, with our expansion, guys, you have, when we set our shoulder alignment, we come into anchor, and then we're continuing. It's a very small movement, right? And so people have a hard time conceptualizing what is the movement. You know, they think about pulling this way. They think about pulling the hand along the face. They think about moving the head with the hand. None of these are correct. It is like an angular motion within the body where, if you think about your alignment, okay? When you come into anchor, the way I like to explain it is that you're in 99.5% alignment. And then that last 2 millimeters to make the clicker drop, that is you going from 99.5 to 100% alignment. All right, that's that retraction of the scapula, that last 5%. It's the kind of the strength in your shoulder alignment, and that coming, just squeezing into the optimal position. So that where your clicker is set, that's the position where you're in optimal alignment. Does that make sense? Callum's case, yeah, there's a little bit of loss of T posture there. Seen worse. All right, let's just clear that up straight away. And that's where his head movement on follow through is coming from. Okay, now he's left-handed, right? So everything's a bit backwards, at least in my mind. So he said he's having some, high left and low right variance. So you can imagine that as you're expanding, if you're expanding in this manner, that you're losing the direction of the shot whilst your T posture is shifting. So to me, I wonder if that's the reason why he's sometimes having some variance in. So he's going high left, low right, which for a right-handed archer would be high right, low left. Okay, so this sort of action with losing your posture, you understand? So let's sort of park that for now. We will circle back to that, I think. But what I wanted to look at in a bit more detail was his concern with his front shoulder, and I think it's a valid one, his front arm, sorry. So he's talking about here, he mentioned in his comments that he has a high degree of internal rotation. So what he's talking about, okay, is this internal humeral rotation that happens during the shot. We are internally rotating the bow arm. Now, I've done a video on this. I do a bit of a deep dive in my YouTube video on how to shoot with a hypermobile elbow. But basically what happens is everyone has a slightly different range of motion when it comes to this internal rotation. And you'll notice this because if you look at a bunch of the top archers, they all have a slightly different front arm position. And that just has to do with your unique physiology and range of motion. There are a couple of different ways to do it, but for archers like myself and Callum, like there's a high degree of internal mobility, and so that high degree of internal rotation is the most stable position. So I'll just pull up a video of myself and I'll try and illustrate how this should look. So as we go through the shot process, you can notice that, say, in this position, the arm's not rotated down here. All right, the arm is more of a neutral position. We raise, and then from the kind of the apex of the raise to the pre-draw, from this position, the arm is fully internally rotated. And I have a high degree of internal rotation. Don't necessarily try and copy this. Just go watch my video on hypermobile elbows, and yeah, we go through that in a lot of detail. But then you'll notice from there, that front arm position is set. Okay, it's maintained from pre-draw into anchor during expansion, release, and even through the release, you'll notice that if we go just frame by frame here, the arm rotation is maintained through the break of release. The arrow is out of the bow now, and as the bow jumps into the finger sling, this is only when the bow is allowed to, the bow arm is allowed to return to neutral. Okay? So all the way from pre-draw through to release, that front arm is rotated, and as the bow drops into the sling, okay, the arm is allowed to return to neutral. And this has to do with looking after that muscle that Callum brought up, which is the supraspinatus. Now, the supraspinatus, it's one of the muscles in the rotator cuff, right? And gold star, if you know how many rotator cuff muscles there are 4. And platinum star, if you can name them all, right? Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. So the rotator cuff are really important. They have a really important function for like stability of the shoulder, but they're smaller muscles that they're not the prime movers, so they can be easily injured or strained if your technique works in such a way to fatigue those muscles or overuse them. Okay, so they are prone to injury with technique errors. So what Callum's talking about here that's a little bit alarming is that he says he can hold the position during SPT, but when he's expanding, he loses that position. And you can see here, expanding, look at the front arm, zoom in. Can you see that? The elbow's turning up, right? You can see the arm guard moving until it releases. And what he said was that as he's holding that rotation, if he just forces it to hold in position, he feels pain in his supraspinatus, which kind of goes through there. We need to talk about anatomy for a moment. I'm just going to very quickly try and pull up a picture so you can see. All right, this is the supraspinatus. Okay, you can see it attaches to the top of the scapular process here and connects, goes underneath like the AC joint and connects to the top of the humerus. So what it does, guys, the supraspinatus, is it's an external rotator. If you do this motion here where you have your arm in this position and you rotate it externally, so external humeral rotation, the supraspinatus is doing that motion. Okay, it's assisting that motion. So let's think about this in the context of archery technique. So if you have the arm internally rotated, right, this way, what's happening to the supraspinatus? Well, the muscle is being stretched. It's an external rotator. So when you internally rotate, the supraspinatus is lengthened. So when the muscle is at its full extension and it's fully lengthened, then it's at its most vulnerable to being strained as well. So what I would ask Callum to do here is he needs to look at some screening exercises. I'd first look at, if I was with you, Callum, I would look at your degree of internal rotation. So you can see that I have a high degree of internal rotation here without losing the shoulder, right? But when you're screening this, you can kind of see do it with me while you're watching along. Let me know, guys. Where's your internal rotation? Is it past 90 degrees? Okay, before you start losing the shoulder position. when you get to the end of the range of motion, if you try and externally rotate against resistance, do you feel pain? If you do, you may have injured your supraspinatus. It may have been from shooting, it may have been from something else, lifting concrete bags, doing jiu-jitsu, whatever you do other than archery, or maybe it's from shooting itself. You probably need to rehabilitate the injury before you can address the technique thing, okay? So you might need to see a physio, but sometimes what happens if you strain a muscle, guys, is that the muscle actually will repair, but it can build up a little bit of scar tissue in the belly of the muscle. And scar tissue is different from muscle fiber itself because it's more brittle, it's less elastic, and it can also shorten the range of motion. And so you may need to just work with a physical therapist who can help you to kind of break up that scar tissue, increase the range of motion again, and build up strength in your rotator cuff generally, which is going to hopefully alleviate that pain. It's not exactly something I can do through video though for you, unfortunately. But happy to talk about that with you separately, Callum, and we're going to refer you to a physio for that one. So we already identified that as he's expanding, he's losing this front arm position, and he can't maintain that that position without feeling pain. Now I have a question for you here, Callum, because there's also another common misunderstanding with archery technique during expansion. We talked about the misunderstanding with back tension before, right? That you should be feeling this muscular strain in the back. You've got a good scap position here. But with the front shoulder, this is also a common one. Let me know in the comments, have you ever been told to push towards the target during expansion? I've said this too before, but you've got to be careful with the terminology you use because this is also commonly misunderstood by archers and then poorly implemented. So when we say push, a lot of people interpret this to mean this kind of motion, like push. No, the correct expansion is not this way. Like go look at top archers. You won't see any of them going this way, okay? You're not trying to push. There's no mechanism for the shoulder to maintain stability and to move out of the joint towards the target under the compressive force of the bow. So what you end up doing if you try and do this from the shoulder is you end up just pushing this way, losing the shoulder position, definitely unrotating the internal rotation position, and just honestly losing direction in the shot. So no, the objective is not to push in that manner. So this cue is often helpful for people if they're starting to collapse in the front shoulder. So if you have someone that is, during expansion, they're breaking this way, pushing can help them kind of maintain, or the sensation of pushing can help them resist that collapsing front shoulder and brace against it. So in that manner, that cue is kind of helpful if you have an archer who's collapsing. But it's not the way to get through the clicker. So I actually really like, one of the ways I heard this was someone told me that the way they teach it is to say push like you're pushing a mountain. I don't know where that came from, but it's brilliant because when you push a mountain, the mountain doesn't move, right? You're just applying force and it's static. And that's kind of the same thing with the shoulder, is that don't think about you pushing the bow towards the target. Think about the bow pushing back into you and you're bracing against it, right? So as you're drawing a recurve bow, what happens to the poundage? It increases. So the force is growing into you. It's pushing into you. And your job is to resist that force with force equilibrium and to maintain that shoulder set and to keep it pinned down and to brace against that force into you. And that's kind of the push we're looking for. And people often confuse force with motion. And while the motion is mostly on this side, the drawing side, as you pull back the bow, the force on the front side is in equilibrium with the force drawing. It might take a bit to wrap your head around that. Let's not get hung up on it for now. I've got other videos and a whole course on that stuff. But back to Callum. So I think that he has a misunderstanding, or maybe just a bad habit, around expanding by pushing the shoulder towards the target. I would say, Callum, that no, your structure in this position as you come into anchor is actually solid. And as you go through expansion, you are kind of losing T posture and shifting your T posture in this direction. We already identified that. But what your focus should be in expansion is A, keep the shoulder pinned down. Okay, down, not pushing forward, keep the shoulder down. Because when you actively pull that shoulder down, you activate and stabilize it in the glenohumeral joint. You stabilize the whole shoulder girdle. So shoulder mechanics are, again, another whole topic for another video, and I've covered that separately elsewhere. But the intention of this shoulder is down, not forward. Okay, and if you keep that force down nice and strong, then it will stop it from collapsing in, and it'll stop it from overextending forward. The next thing is you're trying to maintain T posture, and you're just, do that little squeeze through the clicker is a scapular retraction, continues in a nice fluid motion. You've got that already going, and just an optimization of your alignment. Very, very small motion, okay? And if you need to lose T posture, then you need to review your clicker position. So shoot without the clicker for a little while, have a look at the clicker position where it's sitting there, and just position your clicker so you have like 2 millimeters to expand through. That's from when you land in anchor, that's quite a natural, easy range of motion to be able to achieve at your skill level by expanding through the clicker. If you're learning to shoot with the clicker for the first time, a little bit more than that is okay, up to 5 millimeters, just to learn the correct action. But at your skill level, Callum, 2 mil is going to be just fine, mate. Okay, so we've talked about front arm pushing. We've talked about supraspinatus pain. You need to screen the range of motion. You need to identify any injury, which I suspect could be the case. We've looked at myself and how that front arm rotation should be through the whole shot. Okay, where through expansion, the front shoulder is pinned down and it's maintained during expansion. It's only after that the arm is allowed to return to neutral. Okay. Now the other thing Callum brought up was, where was the angle? No, this one. Okay, he talked about canting the bow to the left. Now, you can see here that, maybe the bow's on a really small cant, 1 degree, half a degree, something like that. But to be honest, if you didn't mention this, I wouldn't have picked up on it. So with bow cant, the angle of cant is less important than the degree of variance in the cant. So to be honest, mate, if you're shooting 270 level and you were working on this stuff, I would just park that for later. Because that's probably not a priority, and your bow cant looks really, really slight here. I would say, as long as it's consistent, don't worry about it for now. And to be honest, when you talk about bow cant, if we look at through the draw, you do have some postural shift here in your weight distribution. You can see his whole body kind of shifting forward and back there. Okay, that's going to affect the shot more. You can sort of see there, right? That's going to affect the shot more than the bow can, and obviously cant the bow as well. As your body tilts, the bow tilts with it. And now the other thing that Callum talked about was that he loses he said he loses the feeling of the shot. And he talks about in competition, he doubts himself and tries to, obviously, I suspect here, tries to fix issues one after the other, and eventually just leads to the whole shot unraveling. So I've got some advice on the mindset here for you, because I think, again, your technical skill is better than your current results. So that's where the mindset comes into it. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is you need to reframe the objectives of your tournament. So before you do an event, this can work whether it's a practice session, this can work whether it's a minor event or a major event, is do what I call event goal setting. Now I have a whole seminar on this available on YouTube and in a masterclass, in a goal setting seminar, where I go into much more detail. But essentially, event goal setting, what I recommend is you set, and when we set a goal, we're defining success. And you can define success in multiple ways. So I encourage archers to set an outcome goal. All right, so that's a score, maybe a grouping consistency, maybe a podium placing or a placing in an event. So some sort of outcome, you're allowed to do that. You set a process goal. So a process goal is something within yourself. So something technical maybe. So maybe you want to maintain timing during competition. Maybe you want to make sure that front shoulder stays pinned. And so how do you know if you do a good shot? It's a good shot if you follow and achieve your process goals. So set them before the event. And if you're working on a couple of things here, I'd say focus on maintaining your T posture and maintaining that front shoulder pin through the expansion and follow through. Okay, and then you want to set an experience goal. And this is perhaps the most unintuitive one for most athletes because we tend to think about experience afterwards. And an experience goal I define as something you hope to learn from the event. And what this does is it actually opens you up to experiencing the event and getting the full benefit of that experience. So, so process, outcome, and experience goal. And that way, you're kind of directing your focus. You're not just going into the event and then deciding whether or not you've done a good shot or it's been a successful day based on the feeling or the emotion attached to the outcome of that particular shot. How are you going to feel about that? No. Define an outcome that is aligned with your other goals. So if you're talking about some loss of direction and errors and looking at your scorecard, you're basically shooting 100% of your gripping within the 8, like most of it in the goal, but almost all of it within the 8 with some mistakes, right? So you can improve your score substantially just by bringing the mistakes into your grouping. You don't even need to really, change technique for that. It's just minimizing mistakes. Okay, so that'd be a great outcome for an event, wouldn't it? It was to shoot a full round with no mistakes. Actually, that's a really good outcome. So if you could say, make your goal range 8, as in shoot a full 30 arrow or 60 arrow indoor round inside the 8 or better, you don't have to snipe 10s, okay, to achieve that. You can shoot just your normal ability, and that's kind of going to help you soften your aiming focus a little bit, and you don't have to worry if there's a little bit of movement in your sight pin. It's okay, mate. You can just shoot 8s and better, and you're still going to shoot a better score. The other thing, process we talked about, I recommend T posture and keeping the front shoulder pin going. And an experience goal, that's up to you. Yeah, what you'd like to hope to learn from the event. Maybe one to consider, I'll give you a few suggestions, is how do you handle it when the plan starts to fall apart? How can you get yourself back on track? So mistakes happen, okay? But how you respond to them is really what matters. So if you do make a mistake or if you start to notice your form failing, don't go chasing it. Don't go looking for the thing that's wrong. Just get back to your process goal. If your process goal is posture and front shoulder, don't break down your release and head position and anchor and pinky tension and tongue touching the molar or whatever the other secrets of archery elite success are. Just stick to the plan, okay? Stick to the plan. The other advice I have for you is to soften your aiming focus. So I said before, try and keep your grouping, say, within the 8. You're going to see an improvement in your groupings. So it's really interesting. So not a lot of people think about it this way, but where is the 10? It's in the middle of the target. It's in the middle of the red, basically. The middle of the blue. It's the middle of the black. You don't actually have to hold your sight pin perfectly still on the 10 in order to shoot one. It's more about direction than aiming. You aim with your body, not your eyes. So it's more about the direction that your expansion is going as the shot breaks. So again, if your goal is to just bring the mistakes into your grouping, then I would suggest go ahead and aim for a range red focus is what I would call, where your aiming is the resolution of your grouping. So if you're grouping the size of the red, aim at the level of the red. If your grouping is this big and your aiming is this big, it's incongruent. You're not that good, right? If you can group the size of the 10, go ahead and aim for the 10, guys. But yeah, there's way more common over-aiming issues than under-aiming issues. So I spend my whole time teaching people how to soften the aiming focus and let the body learn how to aim intuitively. So yeah, soften the aiming focus, increase the timing and expansion focus. All right, hopefully that's helpful, Callum. Let's jump on to our next archer. Okay, so our next archer is Christoph from Norway. And Christoph, I believe you're coached by my good mate Ben Backhoffen. Is that true? So Ben is good mate of mine, really great guy, who I think coaches the Norwegian national team or has coached the team for some events. But he's obviously done some really good work with you here, I can tell. And Christoph has also sent us some notes. So let's have a look at what he said. He said, today's shooting had been consistent. Lately I've had some issues with arrows in the miss zone high left. Okay. Possibly bad release or the string rubbing the chin when fighting through the clicker. Okay, fighting through the clicker again, that's not a good sign. Last week I went down in poundage from 38 to 35 pounds and pushed the clicker 5 millimeters. Not sure if this is a long-term fix, but it looked good on the target today. Good. In 2024, I shot around 520 out of 600. So he's talking about an indoor score out of 600 there, guys. So he shot a 520 out of 600 in training, some peaks at 540, and 480 in competition with a PB of 490 in competition. So again, we're seeing a disparity there between the practice scores and the competition scores. So that's mindset. We'll try and tie that into it, because what you can shoot in practice is your technical ability, but then obviously if you're not carrying that through to competition, that tends to be somewhat mindset related. I generally feel anxious and stiff in competition. You're not alone, Christoph. This is something I'm also working on. Right now, my main goal is to find a sustainable archery family balance, trying to train enough to maintain some progress, but without compromising on the needs of present for my newborn baby. So Christoph, first of all, congratulations, bro. I'm so happy for you, for your newborn baby. I have this 8-month-old as well at the moment, so I totally understand, the balance thing. And, for all the emphasis we put on archery, archery is life, but when you hold your newborn baby, it changes those priorities a bit. I totally get it. So let's break it down. So he sent some good video here, and I appreciate that in Christoph's video, he's obviously shown us his shots from an angle, and then he's showing us the result on the target. So that's good as well. So the first things first is that process looks pretty good. Okay, let's find the right angle. So, okay, again, T posture is also looking good. So you can see here, guys, that T posture is looking like a T. So that's excellent work. Okay, a little bit of recoil and things, we'll talk about that. A couple of other things I noticed, I'll just try and highlight from the best angle. Where was it? Okay, from here. What do you guys think? What do you see in the video? We talked about it before. With all the archers we've looked at so far, we've started with the hips in the stance. So if we just slow this down and look here. Through his shot, do you see that? So he's shooting with a square stance, which is great. But then as he goes through the first part of the shot, that pre-draw position, it happens through a rotation of the hips rather than a rotation of the core. Okay. Can you see it there? So from this position, set up, we want the hips in line with the stance. So with the square stance, your hips would be square to the target as well. And then what we want to do is we rotate through the core to achieve, through the thoracic spine, in order to achieve that that shoulder alignment position. Whereas what you're doing at the moment is you're kind of rotating the hips. You can see the quiver tilting there. Can you guys see that? Okay, so that's obviously going to affect the efficiency and power of your shot, because you're not using the kind of power within your core, within your trunk to draw the bow. You're using momentum from swinging the hips. And so often a lot of shot stability can be lost there. So I would say first things first is we need to work on that thoracic rotation, core control, and up into the pre-draw position, trying to achieve that with thoracic rotation. So that's actually quite a big technical focus, and that might take a little bit of practice to nail that down. The other thing was the head movement. So we're seeing another common theme here, guys, is the head is facing too much towards the target. I think there's a better angle. Okay, here we go. Okay, from here. Let's draw his head on. So interesting, yeah, his head actually moves towards the target. You see that? And recoils forward as well. And rotates away. So he's starting. So, Christoph, my first bit of advice is too intense towards the target. You're turning your head too far forward. It's too intense at staring at the target. Just soften your gaze a little bit. You know, it doesn't need to be like this. It can just be just a glance, okay, like this. When you come into anchor, ideally from setup position, your head's already set, and you don't want to have to move your head to come in. So that starting head position, we've looked at it with the other archers as well, is definitely worth paying attention to. I would start though with the core rotation, because again, learning how to rotate through the thoracic spine to achieve pre-draw and the head position, like that will affect the head position. So let's start with that and work from the ground up. So hips, core rotation, and then maybe we'll look at tidying up the head position. Okay. And as well for a future project, we'll look at that weight distribution. Because you can see, again, I'll just draw a line on here so we get some vertical reference here, right? So you can see that there's some movement in weight distribution here. So in the masterclass in the stance module, I give some examples on how to do that with the drills on both the tilt board and the balance discs. That will make you hypersensitive to it. So when you're doing your tech draws and things on a training bow, then yeah, jump on the balance discs and the tilt board, and that will just really improve your sensitivity and awareness of the weight distribution. Okay, so that's an easy one actually. Now the other thing that I picked up on when I looked at your videos earlier, get rid of this, is you've provided a really nice angle here, okay, where we look at the front hand. So this is really good because we can actually see the clicker control, the timing, and the front hand reaction. All right, so let me grab my trusty axis here. I keep this handy just in case someone breaks in. You know, it's a great self-defense tool. You can sort of jack your car up with it. These things are indestructible. So, all right, let's talk about your front hand position. This one here. And what I want to try and demonstrate is you've obviously got the hand placement okay, but I'll try and get the camera to focus on this if I can. The position of the hand is lost during the shot a little bit. There's a lot of tension in your fingers, I can tell. Even though you're not gripping the bow, the tension, the hand is quite tense. So I want to talk about how to maintain direct pressure into the grip, because I talk a lot about this concept of direction, meaning, again, it's not where the sight pin is holding, it's where the direction of your body and the shot is moving through expansion and through the break of release, which indicates where the arrow goes more. So through the grip, what we're trying to achieve is through the sort of pressure point, or where we're applying pressure into the grip, we want that to be directional. It needs to be really stable and strong. So as we go through the hand position, all right, I'll I'll sacrifice my hand here for you guys. We have kind of the contact area. This pen's not working real well, but okay. Contact area is something like that, okay, through the grip. And then we have, you know, the pivot point up here, okay? And then we have the pressure point, which is more like there. And so I've had some recent discussions with some other coaches on this, and credit where credit's due. So Mr. Okyomoon, Olympic gold medalist and former Australian national coach, as well as former Korean national coach, we had a good discussion about, you know, his method in teaching the pressure point. And obviously what we really want to do is we're trying to translate the stability from the posture through the arm and through the wrist into the grip, because the more the tension is through the hand, there's so many little bones and joints, and there's much more susceptible to instability and inconsistency. And another great coach, Lynette Rankin, who's Ryan Tyak's coach, and the way she teaches this is obviously there's 2 bones in the forearm. There's the radius and the ulnar. And if you think about the radius, sort of the force going down the radius, that's this top bone in your forearm through your wrist and into the pressure point. That's the way to position the hand into the grip. I really like that method because it's kind of a visual reference as well. When you're setting your hand into the bow, you can look down and you can kind of visualize the force going through your bow, or through your arm, through your wrist and into the bow. Okay, so always love those conversations, but what I want to point out to you is that the angle of the wrist and the positioning of the hand really does influence this. So it's a bit hard for me to demonstrate on camera, but you can see that I can place my hand wherever I want it, but if I am letting the wrist go limp this way, and if my pinky knuckle goes too much towards the target like that, this is what I'm seeing in you. So you can see here that I think the pinky knuckle is too much extended towards the target. And what we actually want to do is pull the pinky knuckle back and almost think about extending more thumb side pressure into the grip. Okay? It's hard to get the camera to focus on that. But more pulling the pinky knuckle back in line and a little bit more kind of thumb side pressure into the grip, which will help align that pressure point with the center of the grip. Otherwise, you can see that as you pull the bow back, if the wrist is too soft, then it can break in this direction, and that loses a lot of stability in the shot. So a little bit more thumb side pressure in the wrist. This is also a very subtle thing, because whilst we're trying to maintain that a little bit more thumb side pressure, like extending the thumb towards the target, we don't want it to translate into too much tension in the wrist or the fingers. So that's quite nuanced. I like that method of teaching, thinking about the radius going through the wrist and aligning with the pressure point. I think we can go back, review the setup module where we talk about front hand positioning in the masterclass, and then that will also improve your gripping and your front hand reaction. Okay. Now the other thing I picked up on was scapular control. Okay, so this is a good angle. Let's zoom right in. So we've talked a lot about scapular positioning in this video already. It is really important. Yeah, so I think along with the core control, you need to work on scapular control, or shoulder girdle strength and stability. So as we go from pre-draw position, the scapula is kind of in this position. Now the footage, when it's zoomed in a bit like this, the lighting isn't amazing, and so it's a bit grainy. So I'll try and explain what I'm seeing as well for the people watching along. Okay, so into anchor, your scapular positioning is okay. But then you can see that the release reaction is a little bit funky here. It's not really correct. The elbow pops back and the hand comes around, but we're not getting the correct scapular reaction. So what should happen, as we know, is the scapula continues to react towards the spine and squeeze through expansion. What I'm seeing though is that you're probably squeezing more here, and the scapula is actually unrotating, and you're definitely thinking about pulling the elbow around, but it's not connected to the scapula here. So when I talk about the loading process, where we're going from pre-draw, loading into anchor, and then transitioning into expansion, release, follow through, that's one fluid motion where the scapula continues to retract around. Whereas in your case, what's happening is the scapula is retracting, stopping, you're changing to squeeze with the upper traps rather than continuing that fluidity, and you're kind of pulling the elbow around, but it's not coming from the scapula anymore. And the scapula is the prime mover, the main controlling big muscle group that is pulling the scapula around as the scapular retractors, and that's where the power comes from here. So I think that in your case, some general scapular control will help. And this is one thing that shouldn't be overlooked with coaching is the general motor control and strength and conditioning work. That's a prerequisite for a lot of the technical elements. So the other thing that you mentioned, Christoph, was that you've lowered your poundage a little bit, but you're trying to find the balance with family. And this is something that no one really talks about, because this is the balance of things for, say, non-elite archers. For elite archers, the way they talk is always about the optimal training program. When you're a full-time athlete and you're going for the highest levels of performance, then that's fantastic. That's the way to look at it. But most people are not full-time athletes. Let me know if you are. Please comment below. I'd love to hear from you and connect. But yeah, the majority of people are working in school, have families, have other commitments. And so in this manner, what we have to do to try and continue to improve is to, with the time we have available, is to focus on what I call high-yielding training, right? So what's the best bang for buck in terms of time to results? So when you also have a material change in your life, like having a baby, change job, or whatever, like there's family commitments, let's be real about it, you have to review that and realign, your goals with what you're working on and your training program with what's achievable. And so I've got some guidelines here, because you've dropped in poundage, but I suspect maybe you might need to drop more, mate. I have some guidelines for how many arrows you shoot in the week and what poundage is appropriate. So if you're shooting less than 400 arrows a week, shoot 24 pounds, right? Less than 400 hours a week, you're shooting, you might be shooting a couple of days or a few days or whatever, drop it right down, okay? Work on technique and work on building up the volume and consistency. If you're shooting 400 to 600 arrows per week, then you can shoot 30 pounds, okay, up to 30 pounds. If you're shooting 600 to 800 arrows per week, then you can go up to 36 pounds. If you're shooting sort of 1,000 arrows per week, then you can go up to that sort of 42-ish pounds. And if you're shooting more than that, now you're in the realm of sort of your semi-pro or pro archer, 12, 1,500 hours a week, then of course you're going to be shooting at whatever poundage is appropriate. You can also align this with your technical focus. So if you're working on major form changes, okay, then obviously drop it right back down. And we have a bit of a hierarchy. Rogue Archery, what we teach is it goes technique, then volume, and then load, or technique, volume, strength. So when you're working on a new skill or a new technique, first you take away all the complexity, take away the load, and get it on a pipe bow, get it on a flex band or a bit of TheraBand or something. And if you can't do it without any load, what's the chances you can do it on a bow? Even if it's not a heavy bow, like, it's impossible, guys. So you need to remove the complexity before adding the complexity back on, and load is a element of complexity. Same as like shooting targets and scoring, right? That's a layer of complexity. So if you're working on new skills, strip away the target, okay? Strip away, even depending on what you're working on, strip away the butt. If you're working on things like that thoracic rotation, then shooting targets is not the best thing. You need to go back to the band, go back to the training bow, and work on the drill in front of the mirror and getting that thoracic rotation to achieve shoulder alignment. We saw it before in our example of Brady. It's in the pre-drill module in the masterclass. I go through all the drills in there. So just go back, review that, and we'll go from there. So now again, I talk about some appropriate poundages. Now, Christoph has said that he's shooting those sort of low 500s in practice and high 400s in competition at indoors. If you're shooting 18 meters, you don't actually need a lot of poundage to shoot high scores. You know, if you drop it right back, even 24 pound, 30 pound limbs or whatever are quite capable of shooting higher scores at indoors. And until you get the technique sorted, then yeah, there's probably less benefit. You're going to be more consistent anyway and more in control of the bow. And I'm really amazed at how, to be honest, how far limb technology has come in the last 10, 15 years. I remember having to shoot old bangers of limbs, and you have to shoot like 50 pounds to try and shoot 70 meters accurately. Whereas at the moment, I'm in a similar position to you. I've just had a baby. I'm not training full time. I'm just shooting a little bit. And so I'm shooting 32 pound training set of limbs, and I can shoot 70 meters with my full side extension. It's crazy. Now, of course, I'm not leading into a major competition or a World Cup or something. So that's not the end goal. It's just that at my stage when I'm shooting less and not shooting a high volume, then that allows me to still maintain control of my form, work on things, and still shoot decently. So don't be afraid. Get a cheaper, lighter set of limbs and work on it from there. The other thing we talked about was some of the mindset stuff, which we actually talked about with Callum as well. So similar to what I recommended for him was, just look at some goal setting for events. So look at defining a outcome, process, and experience goal, softening that aiming focus up, and also just working on some of those foundational elements within your form will be very, very beneficial. So thank you for sending in your video, Christoph. So let's jump to our next archer from Belgium, which is Else. Okay, so Else is from Belgium, and she's also sent me some notes. So below you can find my form check link. At the moment, I'm not shooting so well. Trying to get better form, but every time I better one thing, a new issue pops up. Guys, can you relate? Yeah. This is archery Else, that tends to happen a bit. So one thing that was better before unravels when she works on a new thing. Now I think it's my bow shoulder. I think that it's not as stable as before, and we'll get to that. Okay. I shoot 300 to 400 arrows per week, and I do bow practice at home, mostly holding or shot trainer. Not intending to be the best archer, but enjoying the process and getting better at it as a skill. Thank you for the possibility and everything that is in your masterclass. Else, you are absolutely very, very welcome. So, what do you guys think? Let's have a look at what we can see. And straight away, there are a couple of things that credit where credit's due. Like, she's doing really, really lovely. So she's got a nice shot process, okay? Going from the setup, raise pre-draw, checking the shoulder alignment, into anchor. Okay, there's definitely some areas where you can improve. I love to see those pre-draw checks, by the way. So as you go through your process, just jump back there a bit. There's the pre-draw set. And then here you can actually see her set that front shoulder and shoulder alignment deliberately. So that's a really lovely part of your process. Good job. There are also a couple of easy wins that I picked up on just straight up from this. So the first thing is quiver, arm guard, chest guard. So I know you're just shooting in your backyard here, and you know that stuff might not seem important, but if you look, every shot, the way you've positioned your arrows, you actually have to step and adjust your stance in order to go get them. And what's happening here is, I don't know if you can tell, but you can see shot to shot, there's like an inconsistency in your foot placement and your stance a little bit, okay? So just to minimize that, just put your quiver on. or at the very least, if you're practicing and you don't want to stick the quiver on, it's uncomfortable or whatever, just put the arrows in arm's reach, and then at least when you set your stance deliberately, then it'll be very consistent. And if you are struggling with a stance consistency, super cheap way I can tell you how to fix this is get a piece of chalk, all right, and just trace your footprints on your pavers or on the concrete here. So set your stance deliberately, trace them on there, and then just pay attention when you're setting your stance that it's perfect every time. And of course, with repetition, you learn to feel that stance position, and it feels weird when it's not perfect, okay? So that's easy. The other thing is the arm guard. So back to this angle as well. Again, you're shooting with long sleeves here, and you might not have the issue of the string slapping the arm and feeling pain. And some archers get away without an arm guard. But the arm guard has a function as well, which is that sometimes the string doesn't whack the arm, but sometimes it just kind of skims past the arm, or it just kind of reverberates against the arm. And having a smooth, low friction surface, if it just touches, then that does actually improve or minimize the impact of that clearance. So yeah, just arm guard, quiver, and chest guard. There's a little bit of body contact here, and you can't always get rid of the body contact, but you know, when you have that, you can improve it with, you know, posture and weight distribution and front shoulder setting and things. But even if the string is touching the chest, it's the friction against the clothing, or sometimes when you pull the string into your body, the t-shirt will actually wrap around it and then get caught on the string. So that obviously is going to cause flyers. So even before we look at technique, there's some honestly free points, because I'm sure you have that stuff anyway, but just make full use of it. And I think it's just going to minimize those intangible errors or mistakes that you might not otherwise pick up on. Okay, so you did raise the question about the front shoulder, so let's have a good look at that. God, I'm looking at the time, and I had 12 archers to get to today. That's not going to happen. We're already an hour and a half in. All right, so let's look at the front shoulder. So, boom. All right, this is pre-draw. And can I just say, at this position, lovely pre-draw, front shoulder is set correctly. So let's look from here. As you come from pre-draw into anchor, do you guys see what I'm seeing with the front shoulder? So let me ask you, why is this? You know, you can see that she has deliberately and correctly set the front shoulder in this position. Would you guys agree? But then as she transfers her focus onto this side, the scapular retraction and loading into anchor, yeah, the front shoulder kind of starts to creep up and scrunch back a little bit, doesn't it? So there's a couple of things that influence this. The first thing we mentioned earlier, and this relates back to, was it Callum? Yeah. So as you draw back the recurve bow and you pull it back further and further and further, the poundage increases, doesn't it? So when you set the front shoulder in pre-draw, it's under a certain load. And then you keep pulling the bow back and the load is increasing. So if you just maintain that amount of tension in the shoulder setting on the front side, it's not enough. The force is growing. You have to brace against it. And that's that push, like you're pushing a mountain type thing, but you know, don't overextend the shoulder. Just keep that shoulder pin is what I suggest. Keep it pinned down, and as you're drawing back, focus on the position first, not the feeling of the muscles, guys. But you'll know you're not maintaining the position if it starts collapsing. And if you're overdoing it, then the position will be lost another way. So by maintaining the position, you will learn how to apply the correct amount of force. All right. So position over feelings. And so the other thing that's happening here as you go from pre-draw into anchor is a mental thing. So what we generally find is in the first half of the shot, that stance, posture, setup, raise, pre-draw has a focus or emphasis on the front side of the shot. And then when we shift to loading, expansion, release, follow through, it has an emphasis on the back half of the shot. Whereas in reality, we need to maintain balance in the shot across both halves of the body throughout. So raise pre-draw, okay, you've set the front shoulder. And the way to think about it now is you're adding on the scap retraction, you're adding on the focus here rather than taking it away from here. You're not shifting the focus, you're adding. It's like one and another. It's like if you're playing a chord on a piano. You're not playing one note, then take it off and play the next note. You're playing one note and then adding the second one like a chord. I don't play the piano, guys. So that's really important, is to maintain the intensity of that shoulder pin and then also maintain the balance across the body as you focus on the bow side. Okay. All right, let's also look at the scapular positioning. Okay, not too bad. Okay, let's have a look at this. So you can see from pre-draw, okay, she's got a lovely front shoulder set here, and her scapula looks to me like it's about right. Into anchor. There's definitely some scapular retraction here going on, isn't there, guys? Okay, let's just watch very closely. I'm going to zoom this right in. Can you guys see that? All right, scapular positioning here. Into anchor. Oh, did you see that? All right, so she pulls the scapula down and around correctly. And then when she lifts the elbow into anchor, do you see that it actually moves the wrong direction? This is also super common. So it's retracting, 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 lost position, and then you're trying to squeeze it back again as you're expanding. But the structure is lost, you're moving T posture, moving head position, it's all sort of, it's too late. So back to that scap positioning again, guys. What we're really trying to focus on is having a nice fluid, continuous motion of the scapula retracting around towards the spine throughout the shot process. And it does take a bit of skill to get this scapular retraction happening in coordination with the other parts of the shot. And what else was referring to, she made a comment on this actually. She said that as soon as I work on one thing, something else unravels. So if we talk about skill acquisition in principle, it's really important to layer skill development in archery or in anything else. And any particular skill, what we have to do first is we have to reduce the complexity right down. Okay, try and isolate the skill. So what's the skill that we're talking about? Scapular control, right? So we've got a whole series of scapular control drills in the masterclass. Okay, so in the course, in the masterclass, we have the loading module. The main one is where we talk about this sort of scapular positioning through the shot process and scapular control. But I also have a scap control circuit. You can see that it's a key focus on some of our things. Okay, we have a video here on scapular control drills where I go through this and teach you some drills where we focus on scap control. So I'm going to highly encourage you to go back and work on the scap control modules and work on learning these drills where we focus on the range of motion, the correct scap control, and that's going to really, really help you with this foundational stuff. Okay. So that's the first prerequisite, but then what we've got to do is we've got to add it on. So we're talking about skill acquisition, forgive me. So yeah, you've got to take away all the complexity. Don't just try and do it all at once. You've got to first learn the scap control, master that. Then the next progression is low complexity drills, like combining the skills back together is a skill in itself. So you're going to isolate the skill, work on your scap control exercises. There's about 10 of them. Then you're going to get the pipe bow, the training bow, the TheraBand, low resistance, and work on it, incorporating that into your shot process, okay, with low resistance, low stakes, no consequence training drills like this, like the tech draws. Then you're going to slowly build up in resistance, okay, so you go from a flex band to a training bow to a light set of limbs to then maybe shooting blank butt with no targets and working on incorporating the skills in that manner and slowly increasing the layers of complexity. And if you ever find that at one of these things you make the skill more difficult and you fail at it, you can't succeed with say 80% rate of success, then you probably need to dial it back again. You haven't spent enough time on the preceding steps, and just be patient with yourself. You understand that the skipping steps is not a shortcut. It fails to drill in the skill that you're trying to work on, and ultimately that's going to take you much, much longer to master. So my main advice for you else is follow the guidance in the masterclass, and in particular, don't skip the levels of skill progression where we go from breaking the skill down and then building it up incrementally, rather than just trying to fix one thing at a time all together just as you're shooting. There's too much complexity there. You've got to break it down and then build it up. I think the other thing, again, that you can work on here is the bow roll. So with the front hand. Yeah, you can see that the reaction on release actually has quite a bit of tension in the wrist. This is interesting. So you can see, guys, how on release, the wrist actually jumps back. I'll show you again. And then, yeah, the bow tilts forward, but it's kind of less of a reaction and more you guiding it down, I think. So it also looks to me here like your finger sling is too short. And then in the follow through module, I go through and I show you some drills to work on that. One other thing I'll suggest here else is that when you're working on front shoulder and bow hand stuff, first strip down the bow and make it really light in mass weight. So just like we're talking about this gap control, you want to reduce the draw weight. Same thing, when you're talking about front side stuff, front shoulder, front arm, front hand, you want to reduce the bow mass weight. So your bow doesn't look super heavy here, okay? And it's not, but you've got V-bars on, and I think you've got a couple of weights on your stabilizer. Just drop it all right back, and don't be afraid of putting just your long rod with one little cap weight on the end straight into the riser, because by doing that, you're taking 2 weights off the front of the stabilizer, 2 weights off the V-bars, and the V-bar mechanism and the side rods and the extender actually also have about 5 weights worth of weight. So you end up reducing about 8 weights from your bow, all that together, and that means that you can just focus on getting the technique right first, and especially if you're lowering poundage at the same time, then as you build up the volume and progress with the technique, then you can look at bringing those back on, provided that you can maintain the technique. But technique first, then volume, then load. The other really important one, now we haven't addressed this with any of the other archers so far, but this is a good one for instruction purposes, is that during your expansion, okay, I'll pick a good one here. Oh, you skipped pre-draw on that one else. That might be worth checking. All right, but I was looking at the expansion. So during expansion, do you guys see that movement? You're kind of pulling the hand along the face. Yeah, but expansion is not pulling the hand along the face. It's not sliding. Anchor is a connection, you know, we get a solid connection with the jaw with our anchor, and then yeah, it's that optimization of our alignment that gets us through the clicker. So I think, but if we go back earlier in the shot process, where we're talking about, or was it the scapular control and things, I think, yeah, if you work on front shoulder, there's no point even shooting with the clicker, to be honest, until you get both of these things right. You might get a short-term bump in your points because it's making your draw length consistent, but it's not going to be helping your technique, because as you're expanding and pulling the bow this way, your front shoulder is collapsing this way. So how can you have any control of your timing in reality? So what I would suggest is, first of all, get the front shoulder sorted. Second of all, work on scapular control, because that's a huge part of how to correctly expand through the clicker. And then I think you'll actually have a lot more success with your expansion, and I do expect your scores to jump up significantly with that. And there were also some easy wins there. The other drill that I'm going to recommend to you let's go back here, is I have some drills in the masterclass. So, Alice, as we go through this, with the masterclass you're familiar, we have some introductory modules, some foundational principles. Then we have the core modules, right? These are the ones that are like the detailed breakdown into every step of the shot process, everything you kind of need to know, coaching examples, all that sort of stuff. We have some training drills, shot execution. But then, don't forget about these. We have, as you can see, these load of coaching case studies in here. And just to explain, so coaching is not an academic exercise, right? So when I wanted to create this course, I really had a problem because it's all very good to put information out there about here's what to do, here's what not to do this, don't do that. But it's actually really hard to communicate on camera how, the implementation itself. So even if you look at some of my first YouTube videos, I did some coaching case studies where what I did was just turn on the camera and I just coached someone. And I thought that this might be a good way to try and show the transformation process and show the little questions that come up along the way, or how to do interventions to fix certain common problems. And what I've made a huge effort to do is in the masterclass is to expand those coaching case studies to focus on, you can see here the focus, we've got high front shoulders, so there's a good one, expansion, click control and timing, connection fluidity and direction, fixing stance and posture to fix his release. There's these kind of themes that some of them we've addressed already. Efficiency, scapular positioning, elbow tracking, and pre-draw. That looks like a good one, doesn't it? And advanced shoulder stability training. So with Paco. So this is the drill that I'm going to recommend for you, Else. And it's an original drill, but we work on this archer's kind of front arm reaction. You can see there that as he's releasing his front shoulders, his shoulder alignment's actually breaking in the incorrect manner. So, yeah, I developed this drill called shoulder stability drills. Okay, and you can go through and work on that one. So, shoulder stability drills, and what was the other one? I had another module that I wanted to refer to, and that was, okay, so that's under coaching case studies, and then I also have all these live coaching demonstrations. Goodness, where is the one I'm looking for? Advanced, no, not that one. Drilling front shoulder stability. Okay, they're the two practical examples that I wanted to point you to. All right, so again, with those, for the masterclass students, guys, just make sure that, yeah, go through and watch the core modules. When you join, you get access to the whole thing, but I think binge watch the core modules first. Work your way through that. Otherwise, you're going to have knowledge gaps and not understand how the whole process fits together. But then when you're working on a specific element of your form, what I recommend you do is go back and first just rewatch the relevant module. Okay, if you're working on a step in your pre-draw, rewatch the pre-draw module, because there's things in there, it's so detailed that you can't pick it all up on the first viewing. And there's layers to this stuff. And then the next thing is just have a quick scan of the coaching case studies and of the live coaching demonstrations, because they focus more, or they're actual examples of how to implement these things. We show you students, I do live demonstrations of these skills, and that's really there to augment your foundational understanding of the skills. And a lot of the time that kind of builds on the implementation that's built on in the core module. So shoulder stability drills and drilling front shoulder stability are the coaching case studies relevant to you. All right, let's move on to our next archer, who is Halima from the USA. How are you, Halima? So Halima is actually a really great coach and archer in her own right. So she's got a great Instagram channel that I love. I think it's called Mindset Archery, so go give her a follow. She puts out some really cool content and just, yeah, shares her journey and some tips and stuff like that. She's also a barebow archer, which you might notice. And it's kind of interesting to me because I actually get quite a few barebow archers sending me messages saying, hey, can I do the masterclass? Is it relevant? And I'm not a bare bow expert, okay? I don't pretend to be, but a lot of the foundational drills and process from target recurve, I think translates very well to bare bow. But even though I haven't marketed the course that way, I actually have quite a few bare bow students who have joined up and got good results that way. So if you're a bare bow archer and you're interested in this stuff, then I'm not gonna do you a sales pitch, but if you have questions, then I'm actually happy to refer you to some of the other bare bow archers in the group who can probably tell you how they've implemented those principles in that way. So Halima, she's a really good archer. A couple of things that she, I think, does really nicely. She's got a really nice release. Oops, maybe not that one. Nice, relaxed, beautiful, soft release. Posture and follow through is pretty decent. Okay, let's look at some other angles. Okay, we're seeing that scapular control. All right, so let me know what you guys think. There's a couple of little things already that I think we can work on. So let's go back to this front angle. So one of the things that I think is really important is how we draw the bow up to pre-draw. Okay, so I'll just highlight here that at this point in time, you know, T posture is a little bit more like this. Would you guys agree? Then as she goes through the draw, do you guys see that? That there's almost a shift. She straightens out her posture from this position, but the way she gets there is this way. So this is incorrect. Really what we want to do here, try and show you on camera, is instead of, do it this way. Okay, so instead of coming to pre-draw by shifting our head position and shifting our T posture this way, it's more in this direction where we're rotating through the thoracic spine to align our shoulders with the target. So it's this, not... Now, obviously she's not doing it that badly. I'm just trying to exaggerate for the purpose of demonstration. But it's still back to that core control and thoracic rotation as well. I think you'll find that if you shift your structure during the draw like this, it will definitely lead to inconsistency in the shot and also fatigue. So in this position, elbow alignment's a little bit out. Yeah, so elbow alignment's a little bit out. That's interesting. I want to jump back and have a look at her scapular positioning. Okay, it's really hard to see because it's actually a white background and a white t-shirt and everything. And there's not a lot of contrast to see the scapular positioning, but I'll try and highlight what I'm seeing here. So we've looked at scapular positioning, I think, on every archer so far. And you notice how I call it scapular positioning and not back tension? All right, there is some scapular retraction here. And it comes back. But then again, as her elbow comes up, the scapula actually moves the wrong direction. And then the scapula is in this position. And then through the release, the elbow moves back, the scap stays still, and then the scapula squeezes. So there's a loss of connection in the back, where the scapula is moving back and then forward and then still, and then the elbow comes, and then the scap comes. Okay, so you can understand that this is not going to be a powerful, expansion or a powerful position, and there's going to be a lot of loss of power in the drawing side here. So I'm not going to labor on that too much because I think we've talked about that with every archer so far. But Halima, just review the loading module where we talk about that scap positioning, and again, same as else, go and do that scapular control circuit. I still do that every day. It's a very basic series of exercises, but it's not like with some of this stuff, guys. It's not like you learn it and then you just move on and you can never think about it again. You know, there are foundational training drills and movements and things that you need to do. So, you know, it's like if you're a boxer, you learn a jab and then you never practice your jab ever again. Well, no, you probably practice it every single day and reinforce that same movement pattern. Or if you're a gymnast, you still need to learn how to tumble and whatever. So you might add more advanced skills on top of it, but don't ever take away those foundational drills. Don't ever forget who took you to the dance, right? Don't forget the drills that got you to where you are. That's not picking on Halima in particular. I think it's just something I wanted to emphasize, that you need to keep those foundational drills in there. And I'm saying foundational, not basic, because they're not basic. They're the foundation for everything else that comes afterwards. And I even named my course the technique fundamentals. A lot of people have misinterpreted that as like basics or whatever, but no, it's fundamentals because they're the things you have to get right. Right, so scap positioning, we've gone on enough about that. I think if you get that around, that's definitely going to improve your elbow alignment. It cannot not help your elbow alignment. Yeah, okay, let's have a look at the stance again. If we look at the foot angle and the angle of the stance, we've definitely got an open stance, but it's not how I would do it. So what we've got is we've got this foot pointing this way, and kind of set back a little bit. But the way I teach it is, now let's go back and look at another open stance. Let's look at, who did we use before? Brady. He's pretty good. There we are. All right. You'll notice that his back foot, well, first of all, you'll notice that his foot angle is very natural, okay? What a lot of people do with their stance is, if this is how they normally stand, imagine this is a square stance, then what they do for an open stance is they bring their front foot back. No, a square stance is, forgive me, I'm almost 2 hours into this, so we're doing one take, guys, we're going to work it out. All right, so an open stance is where you take your stance and you rotate your body towards the target. You're watching backwards, so it'll look like this for a right-hand archer, I think. So that then opens your stance and your hips to the target for this starting position. If you just drop this foot back, okay, or even if you just rotate it this way, well, first of all, you've changed your foot angle with reference to the other one, okay? They both need to rotate towards the target. Then you'll still have stability through the hips if you keep this foot angle neutral, okay? You'll open at the same time your stance and your hips to the target. Now, if we jump back to Halima, what's happening here is, I think that's what you've done. I think if you're standing square, your feet would look like this. But what you've done is you've taken this foot and just dropped it back. So this foot's still in the same position. Whereas if you're going to open your stance, I would say it should be more like this angle. Maybe not quite that much. Maybe something like this, okay? And then your hips should also be open to the target, whereas at the moment, your hips are square to the target. Now, personally, when I look at your form, Halima, I'm actually going to recommend that rather than adjusting your hips and everything, just shoot with a square stance. Okay, it's going to be much simpler. You're already basically shooting in that manner because from your hips up, your shoulders and your hips and everything are square to the target, and so it's not going to affect your shot process at all, except for increase your stability in the lower body by squaring that up. if you want to shoot with an open stance, then you need to adjust your stance, and you need to open hips and then learn how to rotate through the core again to achieve the shoulder alignment position with thoracic rotation at full draw. That's a mouthful, and that's going to be quite a bit of work. So my recommendation is just switch back to that. These are also, as a quick win, these are also not the best shoes for shooting in. They look like they're a running shoe or something. And this is just a sidebar, guys. Again, we've talked about equipment. There are some easy wins. So, you know, we always focus on the fancy stuff. The bow companies love to sell you stuff. So, you know, you can read the marketing brochure from the latest stabilizer, and it's got advanced vibration reduction technology, and it cures cancer, and it reduces cholesterol, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But, hey, is it going to get you more points? Like, you'd be much better upgrading like your shooting shoes, okay, making sure that something that's a little bit more stable while still being comfortable because you're on your feet all day. You'd be much better focusing on things like, hey, like we said with else, you know, just the basics, the chest guard, the arm guard, the quiver and stuff. Just use your gear correctly is way more important than having the fanciest stuff. And things like shooting shoes is often neglected as a key part of your equipment. But yeah, I think shooting shoes is more beneficial than most of the other things on your equipment. So my recommendation for you is to work on that thoracic rotation, Halima, and to square up that stance, okay? And so the thoracic rotation, I mean, is achieving pre-draw correctly without the shift in T posture. All right, how are we going for time, guys? I had 12 arches to get through. That is simply not going to happen. I think I might do one more. Let's do Kinga. All right, Kinga. Kinga is actually one of my coaching team. She's a Polish import to Australia. She's now a dual citizen. So congratulations on that one. And yeah, let's have a look, see what we think. Ooh, a little 1-inch flinch there. Did you see it? It's all right. We forgive you, Kinga. Yeah, a little bit of hesitation through the clicker on that one. Okay, let's look at some other angles. Let's start with the main ones. Okay, so she's got sit up position, head position, okay. So like I said, guys, let me know what you're seeing when you watch these videos. No two coaches will see the same stuff. I'm doing my best to talk you through as I'm going through and seeing my observations and provide recommendations. But we've already noticed some common themes, haven't we? Head position, posture, hip stability, thoracic rotation, scapular control, front shoulder pinning. Okay, like this stuff, they're not revolutionary concepts, but they are mostly structurally focused. And this is one thing that I'll just pause Kinga for a second. This is one thing that I think is really important to understand about archery technique in general. There's structure, that's how you draw the bow, and it's basically your key position through the shot. So your posture, your shoulder alignment, your anchor, your head position, you know, your stance and hip stability, like all the key positions. If you'll just take a photo of someone's form and analyze it based on a still picture, you could fully analyze their technique structure, okay? Key positions. Then of course, there's like the efficiency of how you draw and the stability and fluidity of the shot. There's like physiology, so we've identified in some of these archers that there's maybe some issues with sort of internal rotation mobility or previous injury, scapular control, it, you know, might be a range of motion, or it might be just a motor control issue. And then we've also identified maybe some issues with strength or conditioning. And then we've also identified some things like thoracic, core control, weight distribution, stuff like that. Those are physiological things that you can train even without a bow. That's in the gym or doing drills, things like that. And so, yeah, there's a few layers to this stuff. Okay, let's get cracking. So, from the setup position. From here, what do you think, guys? How's that T posture? Pretty good? Okay, head position is presented to the target. Now, did you notice that? So, from her starting position, she actually, when she raises and does pre-draw, she has like a forward bias in her posture. Okay. This is relatively common. And I mentioned before about how a lot of archers in the first half of the shot, the focus is on the front, and on the second half of the shot, the focus is on the back. But we need to maintain balance across the whole shot, across both sides of the body. And this is, in essence, an exaggeration of the push and an exaggeration of achieving shoulder alignment this way. So the other thing is that when we achieve shoulder alignment through thoracic rotation, what we should be doing is we should be rotating about the spine. Okay. Now, as in when we rotate the shoulders this way, we're rotating about the spine as the vertical axis. But then what can happen is if you're rotating about the wrong axis, it can displace your whole posture. It requires quite a good understanding of like spatial awareness and an understanding of like 3D spatial movement patterns and things to pick up on that. But I actually think that, yeah, Kinga is probably over-exaggerating this extension towards the target in the first part of the shot, and that's why we're seeing that loss of T posture forward. Whereas some of the other archers you noticed, they were over-emphasizing the back half of the shot. They had T posture up to pre-draw, and then you notice they lost it in the second half when they initiated loading and anchor and expansion. That's when they were losing T posture, whereas for Kinga, who's losing it in the front half of the shot, it's earlier on. Okay, and then you can see how she's expanding here. She's kind of leaning back. There's head movement. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and a similar thing with the head positioning and setup. Okay. So we can see here that when we look at the head position, she is presenting towards the target here, probably looking too much towards the target. And when she rotates, the head turns a little bit away from the target. Not as much as some of the other archers we were looking at, but definitely a little bit. And then when she's loading, yeah, she's tilting the head back. I think this might also be because of the elevation. And this is a difference. This is definitely a consideration when you go from shooting close distance, say blank butt or short distance shooting, to longer distance, is that the angle of the whole bow and your body and everything is slightly different. So this is why it's good to analyze form while shooting long distance as well. This is one of the things I learned in Korea with Coach Kim, actually. I was used to kind of doing I was a blank butt world champion, eh? Like I used to do a 600 arrows at blank butt, you know, until I was satisfied with any tiny little form change or weeks and weeks of it. And then I would try and shoot long distance and things would start to fall apart. And when I went to Korea, Coach Kim was like, no, just like 70 meters straight away. And then making all these form changes and stuff while I was shooting 70. That was a bit intense. But no, it was because the issue wasn't, say, with some of my fundamental form. It was with my form at 70 meters. So sometimes it's really good to look at things through that lens as well. All right, let's look at another angle. Yeah, definitely an overemphasis on pushing towards the target. Now, I actually know that since we've done this video, Kinga and I have been working and we fixed a lot of these things up. But I think for the purpose of instruction, I'll just sort of analyze what I'm looking at here. But it's interesting because it's like a bit looking back in time and seeing some of the things we've already worked on. So this front shoulder is one of them. As she's retracting the scapula, she almost does like a little bit of a shrug as well. You see that? So that's probably too much engagement of the upper traps, whereas we want to keep that shoulder. Basically, the way to think about it, Kinga, is like you're moving this scapula and putting it in this back pocket. Okay? So it's moving down and back and towards the spine. And if you think about continually just moving it towards and putting it in this back pocket, that's the way to do it. Okay, another interesting thing that I'm noticing is I think your finger sling's too long. Just a touch, because the bow's jumping fully out of your control, and so it's forcing you to like pick up the hand a little bit and introducing a little bit of tension into the wrist. So I think you can shorten your finger sling probably by just 1 centimeter would be enough to tidy that up. Let's have a look. Is this clicker control? Yes. All right. So this is a really cool angle, guys, because we can kind of see what's happening in the front hand. So we can see as she comes into anchor, she has quite a nice small expansion range to activate the clicker. That's really good. But there's a little bit of finger movement, isn't there? Do you see that? So when the clicker drops, the fingers move actually before the arrow does. So there's maybe a little bit of subconscious reaction of, or anticipation of the bow jumping in the front hand. So that's something we can work on in drilling just by doing a couple of like bow catches and just try and work on letting the bow jumping out of the hand being a reaction rather than having any anticipation. That's also something that a little bit of video is really hard to pick up on without video feedback. You can see it there, right? That anticipation of the shot. Okay, that's good. So Kinga, a couple of real basic things there. Nope, we don't need Brady anymore. Thanks, Brady. You've done your job. All right, so I think T posture, shifting forward, we need to work on that. Head movement throughout the shot process. I think she's probably overdrawing a little bit, which is why we're seeing this emphasis of shifting T posture just coming into anchor. And I think that might mean we need to adjust her clicker position a tiny amount. We're seeing probably a little bit too much of that, that pushing of the front shoulder forward as she's coming into pre-draw. Just in that raise to pre-draw position in the front shoulder and T posture, I want to work on that a little bit. Then scapular control, it's okay. There's definitely the retraction part, but we'll have a nice look at whether or not you're engaging too much upper traps. We'll shorten the finger sling and work on that reaction of the front hand a little bit. So there's quite a bit to work on there. All right, guys. I think that's just about it for me today. We've been going for over 2 hours now. So I hope you found this video instructive. I've got another half a dozen archers from the masterclass to look at, but I'm gonna have to make that another day. And let me know what you've learned from this lesson. I think just reflecting on these archers, again, we've seen a variety of archers from all around the world. We've had, where have we had? Kinga, I'm gonna say Kinga's from Poland. She's also from Australia now. We've got Helena from the US. We've got Els from Belgium. We've got Christoph from Norway and Callum from the UK. And we've also got a variety of like skill levels and experience levels, but we've also seen some common themes. We've seen some common themes around like the posture and the hip stability. That's really important, working and building the archer from the ground up. We've seen some common themes around like the T posture and a couple of different ways that it can go, too much emphasis moving forward and too much emphasis moving back, and what that means throughout the shot process. And it's pretty hard to maintain balance through both sides through the whole shot process. We've looked at a lot of head movement, haven't we? All of the archers to some degree, I think, have had some head movement, whether it's the starting position being too much towards the target, or whether it's as they're expanding, they're moving their head, or whether they're turning, so there's been head movement galore. Again, super common stuff, and it's really obvious when you look at it on video, whereas sometimes just watch an archer shoot, tiny bit of head movement, you don't even notice it. So video analysis is really valuable for that. And we've also seen, what have we seen as common themes? Oh, we talked about mindset, didn't we? We did talk about the importance of setting process, outcome, and experience goals for events. We talked about defining success by really defining your process goals and then a good shot is one where you get those things right. And when you're in a competition, it's not, you got to turn off analysis mode. I know it's really hard, guys. I'm guilty of this as well. But you've got to just trust your training and execute, and trust that if you follow your process, you're going to get a good result. All right, guys, till next time. Peace.